So here we're going to do a quick material review, applying materials to objects. So I'm going to make a couple quick objects, and I'm hitting Control right click to bring up a shortcut menu. But under Create, we can also just click Plane here. The Control right click is kind of a handy little thing, and I'll make a box and a sphere, and that should be good for now. So there's a couple settings that we want to make sure that we're on the same page here. Under Customize, Custom UI and Default Switcher. I have mine set to Max Mental Ray. Some of these other settings, you know, if all the objects you make are the same color, that's sort of an indication that some of your settings are a little different. We're not going to go over what those are now, so just I'm on max.mentalray. Okay, and so I'm going to hit M to bring up the material editor. And you'll see here there are a lot of sort of predefined materials now, and you know, a lot of these are really pretty good, so feel free to use that. We're going to actually go over some basic materials, sort of how to build your own. So if you hit M and you're in the view like this, the slate material editor is something we'll go over in a different tutorial. So right now, let's switch that back to compact material editor, and this is sort of the original material editor in Max. So with these slots, the first slot selected, I'm going to go down here, Get Material, and I'm just going to pick a standard material. And you'll see that that went sort of clay gray, and with that selected, there's you see that there's a white box. That's the slot that I have selected. I'm going to select an object and hit this Assign Material to Selection. So you'll see that that turned gray. You'll also notice that there are these sort of white chamfers in the corner, and that's indicating that the selected material I have is that material, and if I unselect that material, you'll see that those chamfers went hollow. So again, if I select it, they sort of light up, and if I unselect it, they deselect essentially in the corners. Those chamfers indicate that the material is used in the scene. If there's no chamfers anywhere, that means that material is not used in the scene. So materials, another sort of point is name your materials. I'm going to call this one gray. You cannot have two materials, different materials applied to something that are named the same. So if I were to select this and apply that gray, I'm going to get an error. Or not an error, but it's just telling me that I can either rename it or not. It doesn't like that, so let's call this one blue. Obviously typing it doesn't affect the color of it, so I'm going to apply that. It's still gray. So the basic material parameters, and the basic material is a blend. We're not going to use different ones there. Feel free to switch these and check out the sort of different shading types. So with this material selected, it's called blue. Ambient and diffuse, you'll see that those two are locked. We're going to leave them locked for now. Select either one of them, and in this color key, select blue, and you'll see that everything sort of turned blue as we'd expect. It's a pretty rich royal blue, so let's tone it down a bit. And now you've just got a very sort of flat material blue. So some of the other basic options we have here, we're not going to play with specular color or color illumination for now. We've got transparency, so that does kind of what you would expect it to do. You can see that's the transparency of the object. So you can see objects through it. And two-sided or not, this is sort of an important part. I'm going to create a line quickly. I'm going to use the line tool, right click, I'm going to add a modifier to the line. I'm going to add an extrude modifier and bump it up. So if I were to make this blue, and let's bring that opacity back up, So opacity meaning opaque, how opaque the material is. The less opaque, the more transparent. What we'll see now is the viewport now by default is actually showing both sides of this extruded line. If I hit render, and let's check our render setup just to make sure we're on the same page there. Under common, if you scroll down to the bottom, assign renderer, I'm set to NVIDIA Mental Ray. That's where we want to be. There's some other that should be there by default. If not, switch there. We'll go over the other renderers later. So if I hit render, you'll notice that only a small portion of this segment shows up. And if I were to actually turn around and render again, you'll see now that I see that side of it and not the other side. By default, materials only render to the normal face, meaning that every surface has a front and back side. The back sides by default do not render. So if I hit M for material, bring that up again. If you check two-sided, then your surfaces will behave, they'll have a front and a back will be rendered. An important point, you usually want that on, but if you're getting some funny results, that's often an indicator. So a couple other features there, let me bump up the rendering resolution a little bit just so we can see it a little better. Face map means, if we're not going to do that, we'll go over faceted right now. So faceted, you can kind of see what it's doing to the material. It does exactly that. And a wireframe does this effect. So every segment gets a wire. And you do have some controls over that. Under the extended parameters, you'll see the wire size, and this is sort of a resolution. So pixels, units, you can make that units of the scene, and you'll see here that it's not rendering, but if we actually, you'll see in this that's bumping up pretty heavily. So if I hit render, yeah, it's not representing it in the viewport. That's not typically how we would want to render sort of segments in wire that way anyway. Just know that that's there, and this means pixel. And if I hit render, it's sort of a quick way to create some effects like that. But there are sort of better modeling ways to do this, so we're not going to spend much time on this now. So there's that. Let that finish. If you ever want to cancel a rendering, you can do that. Alright, so I'm going to uncheck wire, and we're going to look at specular, which basically is the sort of shininess of it, and then the glossiness of it is whether sort of it's more plastic or brushed metal. So you can play with these, and when you render, that would be reflected that way. Cancel that. Adding materials, image maps. A lot can be done with image maps. For now, we're going to add a quick, let's just go to the internet and look up wood plank. And we're just going to get some images. This looks nice. It's a little rough. Let's just take this one. Great. I'm going to save image. Fun, sure. So there's that image. I'm going to drag a new material, or I can just click a new slot and select, again, standard. We'll call this one wood. And here, we have all the functions that we have, the colors, all the stuff we can do here. These are the basic material colors. They are overridden by the map channel. So below all the standard fields that we just went under, maps is a very important section. And under the diffuse color, again, you'll see that diffuse and ambient are locked. under diffuse color, we can either click here, select bitmap, and go find it, or we can simply go to the folder. I think this is the wood, yep, and sorry, under the bitmap, there is a slot where it says the actual file right here, so I could drop it there, but even before doing that, I'm going to go back up a level, so go to the parent, so where there's that diffuse color, I'm actually going to just drag the file onto there, and that stays linked, so if you edit this file, this will also edit. So here, we see that that's sort of doing what we'd like it to do. If it looks kind of funny, like it's tiling too much, or it looks like this, what you want to do is make sure that under the map channel, you uncheck use real world scale, and that tiling is set to 1. Tiling is how many times the image repeats. So you can start to see, if I tell it to repeat many times in the U direction, this image repeats 14 times, and you see the seams each time. So I'm going to put that back to 1. And again, the V direction will basically create more planks. So you want to sort of experiment with those. Again, a lot of this in the material, you want to leave this 1-to-1, and you'll control it out in another area, which we'll go over in a second. So there is that. I'm going to apply that to my sphere, and you'll see that it's pink. Why is it pink? I'm going to back out of the material area, and it is basically showing the colors that are in the slot there, in the basic parameters. You have to check this show shaded material in viewport, and then you'll see the effects. So we are seeing the seam there. We're not going to go over how to make non-tiled materials now, or tileable materials, but there's that, and we've got our wood plank, and we're going to also apply it to the floor. So there we have that. So this is a very large plank. We want to control the sort of size of this, or the tiling of the planks. So with this object selected, we want to go to modifiers and add a UVW map. UVW is sort of a standard nomenclature for, the real world coordinates have X, Y, Z. UVW sort of refers to an X, Y, Z of material mapping. So I'm going to just do a UVW map, and that's sort of the most standard one. And by default it said planar. I think it knows it's a plane. So this is where we want to affect the tiling. So we can look this way, that tiling, there's a seam, it's not a great map, so we're going to sort of leave that at 1, and we're going to do the V direction tiling. And there we have a little more believable, and you can get very accurate in terms of the scale. Hit G to turn off the grid. And similar here, with this object selected, we can also add a UVW map. Turn that to spherical. And we are going to, here you can start to do the tiling. So more tiles in that direction. There's a sort of finer grain. And again, in the U direction, it's doing it lengthwise. So we'll leave that at 1. And that's really where you can control the same material. You have different control over different objects. The width direction is a little whack. This is actually controlling the width of how it's mapping it. So if you have sort of an oval shape or pill shaped, you can sort of approximate it this way. But let's just do the mapping. Okay. So we've applied a wood map to it. If we render this out, it's not really going to look like much. Although you see that the map now contains the wood. So some of the more effects, this is a way to basically start creating materials. Again, we'll create one more. Let's just do brick. And often you can write map. The internet is a good source for kinds of maps. Brick bump map. We'll get into bump maps in part 2 of the tutorial. But here we are. We have this brick here. We'll save this image. Bricks, great. And we're going to apply that to, I'm going to create a new material. So I'll just grab the gray just to use it. Call it brick. And there are preset brick materials that are good, but it's important that you sort of understand how to make these things. If I just drag this into that slot, it essentially knows to put the brick in the diffuse color slot. And I'm going to apply this material, and we'll see that it's mapping it 1-to-1. Now, that brick wall from the image is a lot wider, so this scale is basically squished. What we want to do is apply a UVW map, and you'll see that it's planar. And this is sort of an important point. So this plane, you can always see the gizmo here. You can get in there, adjust the gizmo, I can turn it. And what this is doing is, it's essentially, if I pull the gizmo out, it's essentially taking that image and projecting it through that planar map. So as I rotate, it's stretching the image and basically projecting it down through that. And on the sides, it's stretching the image because it's a planar map. Clearly for the box, I would want to use a box map. And for this, you can always go back and say fit and reset so that it squishes back around or reforms itself. And from here, you can control the length and size of it. So if you know exactly the length of those bricks, we can start to control the scale of that. And you'd want to do that, of course, on both sides, since the image is that way. And if you move the gizmo, you'll see that the material actually moves with it. So this is just projecting an image map on it. You'll see this side is moving that way, and then this side is moving that way. So you can align things and sort of calibrate your image that way. And that's basic material map application of a bitmap onto an object.